as chair of the Facilities and Grounds Committee, I just call this meeting to order. And we have on the agenda two items. One is to interview community engagement consultants, and that selection process expected to take approximately 90 minutes with discussions following and so forth. We have our first interview. It's going to commence via Skype at 8:20. And we could discuss the second item. Is there committee consensus to go ahead and deal with the second item first?
Yes.
The second agenda item is simply in the form of a question. Does the county UU property remain for sale? And what do the committee members think about that?
I believe we should take it off the market at this point and hang on to it because we don't know the direction the community is going to send us in resolving our space issues, and it might be something we can use.
Tom?
I would generally agree with that, assuming that there is a potential for using the land for some purpose that might benefit the district in the future. My personal feeling is that and Sandy may have a better memory than I do, but it appeared to me that the land, the 80-some acres of land that's for sale, just had no viable use at all for any potential future school that we could imagine at the time. Having said that, though, if there is a potential for a use of some other creative solution, then I would agree with Sandy that we take it off, leave it as an option.
Well, yeah, my recollection was that when the previous board narrowed the options to 6, and then I think it was around that time that I was elected and Bruce was elected, and we narrowed it down to 4 or 3, that we did our due diligence on UU as to whether or not that would support the high school option, and seemed to be told that it would not for that. It may be for a different option, but ultimately, now that we've had these results, we don't know what option will be put out there again, and I think it would be probably best for us to
Keep it all.
keep it, so not have it. I guess the answer to the question on the agenda is not for the time being, is to pull it for the time being until we've developed this public participation process, investigated various options, and then I wouldn't put it back on the market until we're definite as to whether or not we're going to go in a direction that would allow a school of some sort to be built there.
So we have,
Oh, excuse me.
sorry, go ahead, Sam.
I remember when the property was purchased, and it was purchased with the idea of a 2-year school. It was never purchased with the idea of a 4-year school at that time. And I think that the referendum remember, there was a referendum after that didn't pass. It was
The
for
8-9?
12.
Yeah, 2001, the land was
12
purchased,
12
and
million
then
or something?
and then 8-9 was
And
up
so
in
it was,
2003.
that was the school that
Right.
was supposed to go on there, was a 2-year school, and it was deemed to be usable for that. And Hoffman said you could use it for a 2-year with some leveling. But for a 4-year, I totally get that you can't use it for a 4-year because of all the rolls and all the big parking lots you would need. But you could use it for 2, so.
So we have this on your agenda, we also have it on finance's agenda because of the financial implications as well. And so we would ask the committee, is there consensus or would you like a motion to put this on the board agenda for action in December?
I'll make a motion to put it on the board agenda for action in December.
Is there a second?
Second,
All
sorry.
right. It's been moved and seconded then that this be placed on the next regular committee agenda, which is a week from
Board
tomorrow.
agenda.
Board
Board
agenda.
agenda
I
for
said
action.
committee, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
It's already late and we've just got this meeting underway. But so that the board will take, our recommendation of the board is to take it off the market for the time being. I'd call it indefinite. Is that the motion, for an indefinite period?
Yes.
All right.
Mhm.
With that change to the motion, then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, the motion carries, and it'll be placed on the agenda for the next regular board meeting with that recommendation. All right, now, moving on, we have about 15 minutes here to prepare for our community engagement consultant selection process interviews. We have 2 interviews, one that's going to be conducted via Skype and the other live. We have materials that were included in our last work session attached.
Didn't
One
mean to exclude you.
would be materials that Ann Carroll submitted, which shows a lot of her background, training, and what she envisions doing as a consultant and the variety of services that could be performed. The second page is a description of the IAP2's public participation spectrum, as far as how to get the public engaged, collaborated, empowered, and then also some core values of this organization that I understand that Ms. Carroll is a board member of. And then she pulled together some fairly generic content to give us a sense of what she wanted to discuss, and what I had discussed with her by phone this was just prior to our work session on November 24. And so this was her summary of that. So I think that this was in the materials before. Now, Mr. Biltonen, who's actually our first candidate, is an assistant professor with the UW Extension. His CV, if you will, or resume, includes his education, which is a PhD in Ag and Resource Economics. He's got a bachelor's in economics and in English. Those would seem to be two areas that would be relevant anyway to when we're talking about public participation in this process. And then there's a short bio, and in there's the description of what he did for that the Mekong River Commission, which was over in Vietnam, and worked on that for over a year. So that's the background.
Is this UW Extension in River Falls, or is it the River Falls?
I think it's kind of through the county.
No,
It's
County.
through the county, isn't it?
yeah, St. Croix County.
I think
Okay.
at Baldwin, is their office at Baldwin?
Well, it might be
I don't know where the office is.
where it physically is located. I just know the prefix for the phone number was a 531, which would tell
Oh.
me Holton area. So, but my understanding is that Mr. Biltonen, or Dr. Biltonen, is a resident of our Hudson School District. He did inform me of that. And so from here, I mean, I guess our goal is to, one, determine if we, want to retain either or both in some capacity, and or see if we wanted to open up the search to other community engagement consultants. I guess when it comes to consultants, if you want to open up your search from New York to San Francisco, you can always find many that would profess to have experience in a particular area, and just that the further out we go from the local area, I think we're going to see probably an increase in costs. We're talking about travel expenses and so forth. But if that's ultimately what we decide to do after we interview these folks, then fine. We can talk about that after the interviews are conducted. Now, we had discussed some proposed potential questions. Unlike the superintendent search consultants, they were given more of an opportunity to provide a pitch, if you will. We can still afford them that opportunity, I guess, to introduce themselves and highlight anything they want from their resume, but because this is for a specific purpose, I think that these questions, I haven't read every word of every question, but these seem to be in a fairly good order. I guess I'll just read them as we go, and then describe your approach or philosophy to effective and authentic community engagement. Number 2, describe a situation where you designed a community engagement plan, who was involved in the planning process, and how were those individuals chosen. Number 3, have you supported a community engagement plan where transparency in the process was critical? I really like that question. All right, number 4, describe a situation where you involved a large cross-section of stakeholders, meaning more than 100 community members. How did your plan ensure the public's role was meaningful and their participation was encouraged, and how did you gain input from potentially affected stakeholders who are more challenging to engage? That was question 4. Question 5, describe a community engagement strategy or strategies you have used when the public was divided in its response to solving a community issue. And think that that certainly is apropos to our situation. So number 6, describe the roles and responsibilities you would expect from the board and district staff. Number 7, how have you evaluated other projects to determine that level of community engagement was adequate and represented the concerns of those impacted by the decision? Number 8, with the knowledge that you currently have about Hudson's situation and the failed referendum, what strategies or process would you recommend to move forward? Number 9, how are your fees determined? How much time do you anticipate this work will take? And number 10, what questions do you have for us? So,
It's the same same question sheet we'll use for the other
Mhm.
one.
But certainly you could delete questions, substitute questions, change them,
Mhm.
modify them. These are just suggestions.
I think these are good questions
Good
overall.
questions.
I have maybe I have a misunderstanding as to what the function, some of the function of this position would be, or this service would be. I've been kind of advocating for a quantitative kind of study to determine, so that a scientific study that could indicate, within a 4 to 5% success rate one way or the other, that we would know what the community would support at what price, for what programs, so forth, things like that. When I read this and I read the information here, I'm not sure that that's what they do. I'm not sure that this is what they do,
So,
or part of what they do.
what you described is one strategy
Mhm.
that could be added on as one of the
Okay.
engagement strategies. And we would hope that these consultants would have the expertise to have multiple strategies that could be used as a
Okay.
multi-tiered approach.
Okay, then I might add a question around that line.
About surveys?
About a quantitative survey that gets a scientific representative grouping of our stakeholders that would give us a pretty good indication of what this community would support.
So I think that this consultant's really looking, or these consultants are considering developing strategies to come up with what are the options or things that should be explored on a survey. So like the
Yeah.
surveys down the road from the work that they would be doing with a group or with the board
Okay.
or with a community.
Yeah.
well, if I could, Mary, because I also talked to the group
survey
that does the surveys, the school
perceptions.
thank you. And that gentleman, he admitted that there needs to be some work done before he gets involved.
Yeah.
And I kind of see this consultant as helping us with that process of
Yeah.
getting to the point to where the survey can be developed. And the roles could overlap to some degree.
Sure.
But, and I want to get there too, because
Yeah.
that was the question at our last work session, was whether the survey is one of those shorter, less expensive surveys, but very limited in what you get for responses as to why people voted no or yes. Did we want to do that?
Yeah.
The recommendation of school perceptions was not to go with that if you were pretty set on going with public participation, which I sensed there was a lot of interest in the board
Mhm.
going for, almost consensus, if you will, of getting that public. This helps us, provides outside consultant look at it, somebody who's, disinterested maybe is a little strong word, but somebody who is just unbiased and not having any preconceived notion as to what the end product should be as far as options or how it's handled.
Mhm.
But somebody that would work with us to develop this process of working with the public and getting public input, and to what degree that public input would be helpful for us to then take it to the next stage, which is
Mhm.
taking it to a survey, which then would be ultimately taking it to the voters.
Yeah.
And I think that, yeah.
And
so-
I apologize because I remember now being told about that, this process, the first step, the second step, at the last board session. So I am going to be an advocate for the second step too. I think the first step is needed in terms of creating awareness, education, and understanding and getting feedback. I think all those things are going to be valuable to this function, but I think, I only speak for myself as a board member, but that's, the quantitative survey results, I know from past experience and my own experience, have been very, very helpful, very helpful.
Okay, but with that then, clarification, that our expectation is this is to get us up to the point where we're ready to
Yeah.
do a survey.
Right.
All right, any changes to these questions that we've got? Sandy, do you have any input on those? I think that they start out nice and general, and then come down to more of our specific situation and
Well, they
understanding.
look good, but you know, once they're talking, other questions will
Mhm.
probably come to mind, and I'll just jot them down and
Sure.
ask then. Because these look good.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
they're pretty all-inclusive, it sounds like, it looks like to me.
Do you have a preference for me to ask these pre-set questions, and then you guys come up with other ones? Or do you want to, we can rotate? I could read the first one, then Sandy, and then...
It doesn't really matter to
I
me.
think we just do a free-flowing thing. I mean, we'll just ask the question if it comes to, if we want to ask the question before you do it, you ask the question before we do it.
All right, all right.
I think we should just leave it, I don't look too institutional here.
No, and I'm not, but in order to get through it, we're gonna have 20 minutes
Yeah.
to get through 10 questions, and so, plus the ones that you think of as we go. So, what I'll do is I'll
Okay.
just go ahead and read it.
And I think what'll happen is, we might find that some of these questions, he might address them in what he's gonna say, and we don't even need to ask them.
That's
Some
a
of this
great
stuff-
point. That's
Some of
a
this
very good
stuff
point.
might be.
Right.
So I think we just need to let them speak and check off the questions as they answer them while in their speech, and if there's anything left, then we can ask.
Okay.
I don't know if they prepared something to say, so
Yeah,
they
that's what I
can
was
have
wondering.
introductory comments.
So it's more of
I
an
think they're
interview for
gonna
us.
interview.
We're interviewing them.
Or maybe it's not going to be a
It isn't like what you
presentation
just
and-
went through.
Okay,
Because this is not unlike the superintendent searches, which that's all these guys, these other
Right.
consultants were doing that the personnel committee interviewed.
so
These
this is
people
really
do
designed to get the information out of them then.
Right, right.
Okay.
It's seen, I mean, they've indicated that they're in this area, being a consultant, to basically give us the expertise on how we can best engage the Hudson community in this whole process.
And Jamie, I'm fine with you just going through the questions, and then Sandy and I can just ask follow-up questions,
Right.
or we can just.
Perfect.
separate
That's the way
questions.
we'll do
We
it
can
then.
make a note if we have a follow-up
Yeah.
question and ask it. You know, the gentleman, I read through this note quickly as we were sitting here, and he talks a lot about his work in the Mekong River Delta, but that's pretty much all he talks about. So is that all the experience he's had has been in that type of thing?
That's something to find out.
Yeah, that's something to find out. I know that it's not the case, but he was just using this as an example, because there's gonna
Oh.
be, he views that as something that actually, it transcended nations and involved millions of people.
Okay.
Our school district doesn't have millions of people in
No.
it yet, all right? So we're going to ask them these questions that are kind of designed to probably draw out a little bit more
Okay.
background than what they've provided in there. But yes, I
So why
saw
don't
the
you
same
ask-
thing.
You go ahead and ask the question, and then before you go on to the next one, just ask either one of us if we have anything to add or to ask about the question you just
Or
asked.
just jump in, yep, or
Well,
just jump in
well, I
if
don't wanna
it's
interrupt you.
appropriate, right.
Yeah.
So you have 30 minutes for Eric.
Oh, we do have 30, all right. We don't necessarily need time in between, because we're gonna hold a discussion until we've talked to both.
Right.
All right, that's a good process.
Okay.
Any other,
Is Eric in?
Is he the one that's
Mekong?
gonna be on the,
no, he's not in Vietnam.
No, he's just not in the area right now, this week.
All ready to have me see if I can connect.
mm-hmm,
Sure.
So this was good of him to make himself available in this manner so that you could talk to him.
Yes.
We need to turn down the lights. Is that better?
Yeah.
yes, that's good, thank you.
Looks like a family with kids.
I'll fail.
Okay, that's.
Maybe he is in Vietnam.
Did we confirm that, the time at some point today?
Tim confirmed it with both of them.
Okay.
Tim Minor.
Minor, yes, the board administrative assistant.
And we had a backup plan, which Dave is now implementing.
Now I,
Call
now
failed.
moving towards setback.
Technology.
Well, I guess maybe I jinxed it because me and technology don't mix too well.
Oh, no, that didn't look like it.
I'm going to hope that I get a phone call here any second now. I gave him my number,
Okay.
Call me.
and he only responded to Tim via phone, so I don't have his contact information other than Skype. So I can keep clicking that if you'd like. It seems past the time.
So we don't have his cell number.
So what if it, so what's the difference between clicking the telephone and then nothing? It's the same.
Same funny sound and end result.
Yeah, it is.
So, okay.
We got the green check mark where it says echo and sound test service.
So,
Yeah, I tested a connection with a different contact earlier, and it worked fine to make sure that everything was working on our
Oh,
side.
I believe you.
And then, well, that's good.
Yeah, we
I
believe you.
believe you.
There he's calling.
Ooh.
He was
he was
calling in.
calling.
I clicked video
Yes,
call when that
Oh.
happened.
Oh, it wasn't him, it was you?
Yeah, that was me.
Oh, darn.
Gives a little groan at the attempt.
Oh, goodness.
More water, anybody?
I'm good, thank you.
Just seeing if I have any emails that say something, no?
Would you, would you be able to contact him to find out where he might have the phone number?
I can.
Because I know
try.
he emailed it to me on my school email, which I can't access from my own.
Wouldn't it be the same number that's on Skype?
Your
Oh,
contact has
here we
been
go.
online.
We got him now.
Oh, he's online, yeah.
Excellent, there he is.
Hi, Eric.
Mr. Biltonen? Can you hear us?
Where's the sound coming out of?
Can you hear us, Mr. Biltonen?
Uh-oh,
Don't think so.
Okay,
everybody's
You can
waving.
see us.
yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear us? All right, evidently not. Can you hear us now?
We have, okay.
Any sound at all, Mr.
I'm
Biltonen?
good on this end.
All right, so that's.
I think he sees us, but.
I think he has to
Jesus.
touch something on his computer, on his end.
Does
in order
he- Do you,
To get it to.
can you hear us now?
Yeah, he may have to access his sound. Is his sound turn? His sound turn?
You want, somebody got a paper we can put in front of the camera, ask him if he can turn his sound on?
You can, there's a texting, you can communicate through keyboard.
Do you want to text him, Dave?
On the little speech bubble in the lower.
Tell him that we can hear him.
What are we hearing? Are you typing or him typing?
I know.
Can't hear me, I cannot hear you.
Can you all hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
yes. All
You
right,
may have to
I
type
can't hear
questions.
you.
all right. Can you text him the questions, Dave? Do you have the yellow sheet?
I sure can do that, yeah.
All right, this is where we're gonna have to do it, and then we'll just,
Oh, that's too bad.
Maybe you could
Okay.
ask him for his cell phone number. You could call him on your cell and then ask him the questions that
That's a good
way.
idea. Yeah, we
Ask
can
him-
change sound, we can mute the sound, that's a good idea.
Ask him for his cell phone.
Uh, Why do we want him to?
Because we can mute the sound and
Right,
just-
but wouldn't it be better for a landline?
Yeah, we could.
Okay. Well,
Okay?
is that you?
But I don't know how you're gonna call him. You don't have his phone number.
Well, that's what we need.
Yeah, ask him if it would be something that he could.
Maybe we should block it out so it's just not to the world.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tim, I think you should just stand in front of that one place where his
Oh, you don't want
phone
his
number
phone
might come
number?
in.
Yeah.
Just for now, so that Dave will get it.
Yeah, Dave will get the phone number and then we can maybe delete the,
I don't know, can we delete it afterwards?
we don't want to violate any private confidences or anything
No,
like that.
somebody's cell phone. or
Okay,
whatever.
we got it.
Okay.
Jam back up. I can see his number.
You dial on this one?
Okay. So we're gonna have to get it off that screen too.
Yeah, I can
I
close
think
that.
it'll
He can close
eventually.
the screen out
That's
while
good,
it's back
great.
to it.
Hello.
All right, Mr.
All
Bilton,
right.
and now you can hear us?
I can hear.
All right, well, we could hear you. Evidently, you couldn't hear us.
Right. No, it wasn't coming up through at all.
All right, so the committee has, we have 3
Hey,
people
Tim, you
here, as
okay?
you can see on the screen. And
Thank you.
I'm going to be asking you some questions that we have, and then the other committee members may have follow-up or something that comes up. So I'm just going,
Okay.
we have had an opportunity to review your personal information, a little bio that you submitted to us, so we're familiar with your education and experience. But what I want to get to is, you understand that this is something the board has authorized us to do, is to interview potential community engagement consultants to help us with the
Right.
process of getting public input before we go back to the community with a referendum. You understand that?
Okay, yeah. I do.
All right. So first question is, describe your approach or philosophy to effective and authentic community engagement. What is your approach or philosophy in that regard?
Well, my approach is to come in as a completely non-biased facilitator, and that means listening to everybody's viewpoint. And that's really the basic element of the whole thing, is to keep an open dialogue with as many people as possible, to get the viewpoints down in some sort of organized fashion, but also to feed into that accurate information and accurate scenarios so that people can sort of work through it. I think one of the things that people get stumbled up in these facilitation processes is they don't put the information out in a way that people can work through it from a decision-making process. So it's sort of like a yes or no response to it, but instead of having to deal with all the issues at hand and sort of the trade-offs that are involved with reaching a final conclusion.
Describe a situation where you designed a community engagement plan. Who was involved in that planning process, and how were those individuals chosen to be part of that process?
The most complex one we did was for a river basin management plan, And that one involved a large number of donors. This was an international river basin. There's 4 national governments involved. There's 22 donors involved, and then there's, of course, the non-governmental stakeholders, and then, of course, the citizens who have a stakeholder in the water resource itself. And we tried to design a process that, from our expertise, expert perspective, sort of balance the interest going out, because you only have so much money and so much time to put into these things. So you try and be fair about giving the different viewpoints some time in the process, but without overwhelming the whole situation and getting bogged down and gathering everybody's viewpoint. And then the way we did that is we implemented it into a round robin sort of approach, where we would go from one stakeholder, get their input, and then go to a different stakeholder and then get their input. So that way you're building progress with each consultation, rather than creating one big noisy get together and then not really knowing which direction you're going in at the end of that. And that went on for about a year. We did that, and it had about 3 consultative rounds, and then we had the document drafted up, and then we'd send out the draft document for different feedback on that to refine the language, refine some of the viewpoints. Of course, there wasn't any unanimous consensus on what it was, but there was general acceptance of it, and it was ultimately approved.
Okay, and how were the individuals chosen to be part of those stakeholders that you would go and consult with then?
Most of them were from well-known groups. Some of them were obvious. The government ones were obvious ones. Donors were obvious. They'd given money, and so they had the financial stakeholder. The citizen kind of groups were chosen by known leaders, and if we didn't know the leaders, we did a bit of outreach to sort of get a better understanding of who was at play in the different regions. There's quite a number of people. What we were trying to do is not get overwhelmed with too many people involved in the process, but a fair representation. And so the team leading the consultative process, we sort of talked among ourselves based on the feedback we had from the outreach interviews, and selected what we thought was a fair sample.
Okay. Any follow-up on that? How have you supported a community engagement plan where transparency in the process was critical?
The ones we did there, we documented everything that was said, and I was in charge of doing that for the written documents as well. And we would literally take every comment that was made for a specific point and move that forward, so that it was a separate document. So if there's any point of contention, we could go back and show who said what for each point, and we could map out the logical process we put to it to come to the final version we ultimately selected. And some of that was based on consensus, that everybody came around to the same viewpoint, and some was just based on the leadership of the organization. The River Basin organization I was working with did have a CEO, and he had ultimate say in what was going to be going forward. Sometimes he just would say that's the one, and sometimes he would compromise.
Okay. If you could describe a situation where you were involved in a large cross-section of stakeholders. Again, this could be that international project you talked about, or maybe something more local here to St. Croix County, but a large cross-section of stakeholders could be something that was more than 100 community members anyway involved. How did your plan ensure that the public's role was meaningful and their participation was encouraged?
This was a different river basin we were doing, and there was actually, I think the population was 28 million people across 26 provinces, and we had a very small budget for that. So getting good representation was difficult, but we did do outreach to all 26 provinces to involve governments, and make sure there was a reasonable cross-section of representation from there. They would actually pick the citizen leaders and the citizen groups that would be involved in it. And then we would have workshops where we pull all these people together to get them in at the beginning of the process, inform them of progress on the process, and then also work with them iteratively as we refine what the final project was, or the final output was. And that was divided into 4 different regions because it was so large. And so again, we went around into different groups to pull in the input there.
How did you gain input from potentially affected stakeholders who were more challenging to engage than compared to the others?
What, can we clarify what we mean challenging to engage? Because there were some that just were hard to reach geographically. There were some that were hard to reach just because of the level of their knowledge. And there was a few that were just resistant because they didn't have an interest.
Well, those are all good examples of people that are challenging to engage, I guess. So did you have any strategy, or how did you gain their input, I guess, from maybe some of the more reluctant or skeptical stakeholders?
That was a tougher one, and what we did is there were some very powerful stakeholders who could override what our interests in planning were. And so what we had to do was bring together good information on what we were planning to do and how it would impact them or could impact them, because there were several scenarios to be worked through. And also to work with them, to build a relation with them so that they could learn to trust us. This one took about 2 years to do. And so we worked back and forth trying to talk to them about what we were doing and show them what the potential benefit was to them. And it was also to show them that they had real meaningful input into the process, that their interests would be represented in what we came up with.
Great. Any follow-up on that?
No.
All right. Now, next question. Describe a community engagement strategy or strategies you have used when the public was divided in its response to solving a community issue.
Process I like to do, I'm a big believer in getting good information out there and also involving the different sides from the very beginning. When people can have input into not just what's coming out at the end of the process, but can have input into the design at the beginning of the process, you usually can get pretty good buy-in. And that means reaching out to the most skeptical people and providing good facilitation in between so that not one side starts overriding the other. And then with the process, you can work with them to sort of gamify the process, which puts them in the position of having to take on this data and information you've got about the situation and have them work through a management decision process so that they can see what the options are and what the trade-offs are and what the outputs, what the outcomes can be from these different decisions that they make.
Okay, so
But ultimately, it's getting good information into their hands and making sure they're in the process from the beginning to the end.
I have a question.
okay, go ahead.
You said that reaching out, involve people from the beginning, reaching out to the skeptical. How would you do that? How do you do that?
If it's a brand new issue, you can raise it publicly and hopefully the skeptical people will make themselves known. And then you can just reach out directly and make a position for them in the process.
But I mean, in
You
what
can talk
way?
to them directly about what kind of data and information they would like or what sort of outcome they would like to see.
I mean, in what way would you, I mean, by survey or online stuff or community gatherings? What would be the process?
I think in St. Croix's situation, I think you could probably have a couple public meetings just to sort of discuss what the process is and look to maybe form a small group of citizens to sit in and maybe in an advisory capacity, maybe another capacity, and get them to self-volunteer that way. But I think just getting a public meeting would be the best initial action. Of course, how you call the meeting is another matter, but I think the issue of the new school is pretty high profile, so a public notice would probably serve to draw out interested parties.
All right, thank you.
Now, what would you expect from the board and district staff? What roles or responsibilities would they have in this process?
The school board?
The school board and/or district's administration.
I would want them to help provide the information and data that is needed for the process and being requested by the people involved, different stakeholders involved. I would also expect some expertise to be contributed to give guidance to how the decision making is going. I think there's a lot of best practices and impacts of education in local communities that the board could really serve a very useful purpose there. And ultimately, the board needs to serve the leadership role to help come to the final conclusion.
Well, as an offshoot to that, would you see the board as, we have a 7-member board, would you see a couple members attending these public meetings and/or work groups?
Yeah, I think it would be it would definitely be valuable for them to attend almost as in a participatory role rather than as the head leading the meeting. And being there to respond to requests from the public, being there to give some guidance, and also just to show support for the public engagement process that's going on.
All right, so more participatory than leading or dictating what's going on.
Yes, especially with the stakeholder engagement part of it.
All right. Then number 7, how have you evaluated other projects to determine the level of community engagement was adequate, whether the community engagement level was adequate and represented the concerns of those impacted by the decision? How can you evaluate whether that cross-section that you referenced before has been achieved?
Well, in this case, I suppose it would be a positive outcome. And positive can be defined in many different ways, of course. That's a good question. I think there'd be some engagement. I mean, as we're looking through the different community leaders and different stakeholders are getting involved in the process, I think talking with them usually helps to discover who needs to be involved, and if people need to be involved that aren't involved, then you can make those moves. Also, by keeping the whole process in the public eye, people who may not be coming into it through other ways will be able to find out and get involved as well. I think keeping an open channel for involvement is critical.
So have you had experiences then where you thought maybe you had sufficient level of community engagement and discovered that you needed to revisit that issue or open up the process even more than what had been there?
I did. There was one experience we had where there was a nice study done and everything was going fine, and then at the final sort of unveiling of what had been done, a certain group of stakeholders said we had missed the 2 most critical issues and that it invalidated all the work that was done. Unfortunately, all the money and time has been spent. So that was a big lesson learned, that people need to be involved from the beginning.
Okay, and how did that get resolved then? Did it still get through and adopted even though there was one particular group that didn't feel its couple issues were up there?
Unfortunately, it didn't get resolved because there was no more money for it. Luckily, it was just a study, and the study unfortunately just died and it was shelved, which was too bad, but that's how that one happened.
Okay. Well, with the knowledge that you currently have about Hudson's situation, and I understand that you are a Hudson School District resident and parent of school district children?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so you already know about the failed referendum and our space situation. What strategies or process would you recommend for us to move forward?
I would say that we need to, as we've been talking about, go through a process of identifying which stakeholders really need to be involved in the process, outlining a process with their input of how we go forward, and then start examining the options that are out there. I think some options have been discussed publicly before. It could probably be revisited with some additional analysis and discussion, and there may be other options that have not been identified yet. But just identifying the stakeholders through a stakeholders participation strategy, and then also defining the process.
And so, as far as that process, you don't have right now any preset ideas as far as whether it's a committee of 12 people, 18 people, or whether it's multiple committees working on issues simultaneously?
What is the deadline? It sounded like you were looking for getting it done within half a year. Is that what I understand?
Well, roughly, I guess that would be another question, is what, knowing our situation and the fact that this has been a process going on several years. We've had previous task forces, and we've had surveys in the past, and public cafes and so forth. But we just need to revisit this public participation. Do you think that this can be accomplished in 90 to 120 days once the process is set up? Or do you think it would be something we should expect longer time?
I'd say, judging from what I saw coming out of the referendum, it's probably going to take longer. I would probably say at least 6 months, and that doesn't mean it's full activity, but it takes a while to get these things moving and get responses formulated to move to the next step. I think it could get going fairly quickly. We'd have to look at the number of stakeholders ultimately reveal that they want to be involved in the process. There's, of course, budgetary concerns that you'd have to look at, how much money. But I'd say you could definitely model something that could be completed within 6 to 12 months.
All right, and also give you, although the board hasn't made definitive, we've discussed it both at our work session and then at tonight's committee meeting, is anticipation of some type of quantitative analysis, a survey of the community. There's other companies that do these surveys, but what we would be looking for is developing the public participation so we get the background and information to know what goes into that survey. Is that a process that you envision would work with what we want to do?
Yes, no, I think it could work very well. In fact, there is a survey research center down in River Falls who works very closely with Extension. And I think working with them, simultaneously developing a process and survey could work very well.
Do you envision this as something where, you talked about a round robin as being one strategy, but getting a cross-section developed, getting that initial feedback, and then starting moving towards a decision-making discussion and analysis of the various options, and then going back to this group maybe even after the survey is done?
Yeah, I think we could do that.
All right. I mean, there's lots of different ways, but you see, we're talking about at least a month to develop the process and get it in place, correct?
I would suggest something like that. That sounds like a reasonable time frame.
I mean, we've got the holidays coming up and so forth, so we're probably not going to be ready to make decisions as to the exact time frame of the process and what the process will look like till probably mid-January. Is that a fair assessment at the earliest?
Yeah, I think that's good. And a lot of this process is me getting up to speed with everything that's been done and is known that the board is in on that I have not gotten up to speed on.
Okay.
So that can be done during December, which is a hard time to get people organized for other things.
Now, you mentioned budgets previously. How are your fees determined? What does that involve? How much time do you anticipate this work would take from your end?
From my end, I'd have to really sit down and look at the process and start and take a much more in-depth look at what the time commitments would be. On the other hand, as an extension employee who's partly paid by the county, I wouldn't have any fees. My service would be free of charge. The only cost would be that of organizing the survey, conducting any analysis or reports that come out of the survey, conducting any focus groups or stakeholder engagement sessions. There'd be minimal funds for that.
Okay. But do you envision what the charges would be for, say, acting as a moderator, if you will, for these meetings and so forth?
The only charge is that of setting up the meeting, of holding the meeting itself, which would be renting the room and the tables and any AV equipment that you might need.
Okay. So these would be hard expenses, and you don't charge an hourly rate or a flat rate for that?
I would not charge an hourly rate. But I
Okay.
would work up some sort of time commitment that it would take.
Right.
But that wouldn't affect the cost at all.
All right. Is that something you envision, these public participation meetings taking place on school property or someplace outside of there?
I think it would be it would depend on the meeting. There's advantages to holding it outside school property. It really does convey that there's real outreach going on. Oftentimes, if they're pulled into the schools, it almost seems like the decision's already made, but going through motion. And that's just something that occurs. That it's regardless of what the process really is. It's just the impression people get.
Okay. Well, we do have, we're at the end of our time. We had a little bit of delay there. Looking up, we had roughly 30 minutes. Are there any questions that you have for us?
The biggest question as an extension employee, I'd be a non-biased facilitator. And so that would be the biggest question is, would the process really be about getting the different viewpoints in and working through a compromise solution? Or would there be some sort of bias expected in the outcome?
Well, I would think that we'd prefer something that was not biased. I mean, we want something that is a facilitator, and you could do that from a standpoint of, again, non-biased. That's what you wanted to see, right? Or what you would expect and prefer and recommend.
Right.
Okay.
But Mr. Eric, would you see that there might be a perception problem of that non-biased question because you have, you have children in the district going to school, things like that? Would you see any problem with that?
I would hope that it wouldn't be there. I think by responding to information and data requests and the process that considers options, that any perception of bias would not come about. But there is that possibility.
All right. And, all right, well, we appreciate your time, and we're expecting to have a regular board meeting next Tuesday where this will be discussed, and then we'll get back to you as to what role, if any possible, that you could help us out with this. And you would then be expected, the timeline after that would be the 30 to 45 days after that to help develop and set up this process. And you would be available for that if called upon?
Yes, I would be available.
All right, very good. Anything else from the rest of the committee?
Thanks for taking your time tonight and putting up with our technology issues.
Thank you,
No problem.
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you for having me. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Should I go up there?
Tim will do it unless you want to. It's up to you.
We'll look to make sure the door is unlocked, Jamie.
She here?
Oh.
You moved her so she couldn't hear the questions.
Is the hallway door open, bathroom?
It is, but if not, they can let you through, Sandy.
Oh, okay. I'll be right back.
I'm running on low. You must be too.
One more.
Yeah.
Yeah, there
You
is.
don't come tomorrow night, though.
No, I gotta get ready to go to Cedar Rapids. 2 meetings tomorrow.
Is that a new one? Or is that?
Yeah, Cedar Rapids is new.
Are we off camera right now?
No, it's wrong.
Do you want to stop it while we kind of regroup here, or
I mean, I can edit it out.
just get a lot of blank space?
Yeah.
So would you like that?
Looks like we had one committee member taking a break.
And Mary Dominic reference.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for saying that.
Absolutely.
Again, Tom Holland is the board.
So nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Go over this way so you don't
Now, and we have one other board member, she's coming back. So she'll be here in a minute.
The committees, we've had committee meetings since 5:30 tonight, so.
Get that. I've been in school board training since 5. So,
And it didn't cause any problems with that training as far as leaving a little early, or?
we make it work.
Okay, great. Well, I think you appreciate your time in doing that.
Introduce myself.
Hi,
Hello.
Sandy Gerke.
Nice to
Hi,
meet you, Sandy
nice to
and
meet you.
Carol.
Now you've had a chance to introduce yourself to, this is the Facilities and Grounds Committee, and we were given the task by the rest of the board to, interview consultants for the community engagement process that we have. And we spoke on the phone before our last work session, and you sent me an email in response to that, just kind of a generic content. We've shared that with the other committee members as well as the other board members. They got that in their materials from last week's work session. So what we want to do today is just ask you some of the same questions we asked this last interviewee, and then there may be follow-up questions or other things that come up. So I want to start with describe your approach or philosophy to effective and authentic community engagement.
I'm happy to. Thank you. Thank you all for this chance to visit with you. as you know, I also serve on the school board, in this case in St. Paul. And so I appreciate your service, I appreciate the hard work that you make, long hours you put in. Staff makes it all happen, so thank you. I'm just really grateful, because if we aren't all doing this work, it doesn't get done as well as it needs to be for our kids, so thanks, I appreciate your service. And I wish more people would tell us all that, but I appreciate it. So, this is an interesting intersection of my school board life and my passion for public education and my professional life. And so, what I do as an independent consultant is I work with clients, almost exclusively public sector clients, to design and in most cases to implement transparent, authentic, inclusive engagement processes. The topics are myriad. So I am a process person, not most often a content person. So I will do work certainly with school districts and with counties and with cities, and the topics can be transportation or homelessness or early childhood education or any number of things. So it's, I don't come in ever as an advocate for a particular position or an outcome. This is not, the work I do is not about a campaign. It's not to convince people to do X. It is a situation where we go through a process, a design process that begins with what are your engagement objectives, not what do you want in the end. What do you want to accomplish through the engagement? Do you want to provide people with information? Do you want to hear people's input? Do you want to hear their feedback? Those are different things. Do you want to teach people about something they don't know that they need to know in order to do something? And a dozen other variations thereof. So you begin the process, and you work with me, of figuring out and agreeing on your engagement objectives. Then, with the material I sent you, you saw, we look at the International Association for Public Participation, the spectrum, and decide for the overall process where you are. And it's mostly about what promise are you making. There isn't a right or wrong. You are where you are, and it just is the fact. What I tell people is you can always move to the right, you can always do more, but you can't go left. So make the promise that you're really committed to making, and own it. Be prepared to defend it. So I put this out in public space. I always encourage you to do it. I encourage you to put the goal out in public space as well as your engagement objectives, written in a way that is appropriate for public consumption. And then you start from the beginning by building a trust in the process, because there's nothing that frustrates and angers people more than feeling that they can't trust the process. Everybody's going to have a position on whatever it is you're talking about. But if you can get everybody to trust an authentic and open and inclusive and transparent process, then you're in a position to move, in some cases, to move from divergence to convergence to consensus. And you don't have to know what that looks like at the end. I mean, I never know. I know people have opinions on what they want, but what I'm striving for usually is consensus around something. And it's going to be what it's going to be. And you don't make it go a certain way if you're doing an authentic engagement process. You make sure it goes where it needs to go, wherever that is. And that's hard. It's hard to suspend that I want this as an answer, right? And to really say, okay, I'm open to some new ideas, some new perspectives. As a community member, I'm open. As a leader, I'm open. Because if we all knew the answer right now, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? So it's suspending that, I know the answer. And realizing that we have to come to a collective answer, or set of answers in almost all cases, as a community. That doesn't mean 100% of the people agree 100% of the time, because you can't get everybody to agree even on what time it is, right? But you'll feel it. You'll feel consensus emerging, and it will emerge in its time. You can't force it. You can't force it, but it will emerge. You help it along. You just don't help along X. You help a process along. You provide people with the information they need, and so on and so on. So you decide where you are on the spectrum, and then I insist that you commit to these core values. Now, they don't have to be word for word. I mean, the word can be adjusted to suit you. Now, you have copies of this, right?
Yes.
Right. Because these work. They're true. They're real. They apply in every circumstance, and some you will find will be much more important than others in a particular situation, but they all matter. And different things matter to different people. And it's very important that you stand up and say, we believe in this, and that's how you stay anchored in the process and the integrity of the process. And when somebody says, I didn't get a chance to, get my opinion known, what can we do to help? Not, well, that was, you missed the meeting. No, it's what can we do to give you that opportunity to get your voice heard, which is different from, I'm mad because I didn't get my way, right?
Mhm.
We're not trying to please everybody all the time. That's not possible. But I don't want anybody to get through a process that we run and say, I didn't get my chance. Nobody told me. There wasn't space for me. You didn't make it work for me. I don't want anybody to feel that. People can choose, after being given 15 chances, whatever, to participate. You know what? Whatever. I'm okay. I don't need to say more or whatever. But I want everybody to feel they had the chance to speak and that they were informed, they understood, they had a chance to try out new ideas. Well, I really thought I liked this, but now that I understand, what that involves, I gotta move. I gotta move someplace else. But that's not very good either. I don't like that. Let people wander through this. They have to wander through it. It's their community. It's their money. It's their kids. And this is complicated. If it were easy, right, we wouldn't be here. This is rocket science. Don't let anybody tell you it isn't. It is very complex. And sometimes most people, we want easy solutions. Oh man, we all have complicated, busy lives. But this is hard, and this is a community decision. Whichever direction anybody chooses to go, it's a community decision. And so you bring the community through a process. So we get through that, and none of that takes very long. And then we map our stakeholders. And we do it collectively, we do it as a group, we do it with, a bunch of you all, but we also do it with selected community members. And these aren't people who have really strong positions. These are people who know this community. So they know the ins and outs, backwards and forwards. These are the connected, the networkers, the people who you call when you're trying to figure out who to find to do something. Oh, call that person they know. So these aren't position, content people. These are people who know who the stakeholders are. And the stakeholders aren't just an amorphous blob, right? Stakeholders have different levels of stake in this particular decision about, the future of the infrastructure of the school in order to serve the current and future kids. And they have different levels of power, right, for this set of issues at this time in this place. This isn't about the governance, this isn't about the presidents, this isn't about, right, not about those people. They have nothing to do with this. It isn't about the mayor. It isn't about just these individual school board members or superintendent or staff. It's about a whole group of stakeholders, kids. And thinking on this kind of issue, it's the children of the children who we are serving now. That's who matters. I mean, at the core of this, in terms of highest stake, are the kids over the next 5 to 7 years who need space in a contemporary, high-quality, challenging, demanding learning environment, right? But they don't have a lot of power over this decision, but they have the highest stake of anybody. Right? So when you look at it, we use a matrix, we go through a process, and really analyze. This isn't just a brainstorm list, we analyze our stakeholders. And then we look at that and talk about, okay, so who's at the table? Because I have to consider the people who are at the table, the high stake, the high power stakeholders, but I don't need to work very hard. I don't need to work hard to get the board engaged. I don't need to work hard to get staff engaged. I don't need to work hard to get current, active parents and guardians and students engaged. They're at the table. I don't have to work hard to get them. But there are bunches of stakeholder groups who I have to work hard to engage. People without kids in the district. People who aren't public school people. Business leaders. Business people who are residents and voters. Lots of them are going to say, whatever. I got a million other things to do. This isn't on my radar screen. Right? Sometimes seniors are in this category. Certainly people in poverty, people of color, non-native English speakers are always there. Youth are always underrepresented in these processes. So we identify the key stakeholders. Not everybody is a key stakeholder. All stakeholders are not created equal for this topic at this time, given your objectives, given where you are on the spectrum. Okay? And we say, so we've got the players, we call them, the high stake, the high power stakeholders, who we know we have to engage, we don't have to work hard to, but who are the others that we have to engage and that we have to work hard to? So we all agree on that. So there's clear consensus about who these stakeholder groups are. It's the end of the workshop. Then you send me off with a small team of people, and we put together a design and an implementation plan dealing with those objectives. The key issues, we'll have done that too. We'll have identified the key issues around which we want to engage our stakeholders. Some of that will occur in that first big workshop, some of it will occur afterwards, but again, we'll reach consensus on all this because you don't just go out and say, hey, what do you think, right? There are a set of key questions. I don't know what they are. I'm sure you know what some of them are. But based on those objectives, based on where you are in the spectrum, based on who the stakeholders are, we need to really get clear on what those questions are. There aren't an infinite number of questions. The questions may be different for different stakeholders. That's perfectly appropriate. I mean, you don't ask seniors the same questions that you ask high school students about a learning environment for K-12 schools. It's just they're different questions, and that's okay. There are some common questions, but others that are quite unique. So you frame the issue, you frame the questions, you frame the context. Then we look at, so what information do people need? Because one of the core values says that public participation provides participants with the information they need to participate in a meaningful way. Well, people have very different levels of information. And they, depending on what your objectives are and what the key issues are, you're going to have an awful lot of people who are going to have a bunch of information that is completely irrelevant to this consultation. Because they're living in a different space and time. They're living in the most recent previous, maybe different versions of past reality, or they've decided they think X should happen. So they're living that reality. What is essential is that you create a common, current reality based on all those decisions you make. I have no idea what that is, but collectively we determine that. So there's an enormous amount of information. It's not vast quantities, but it's a very specific block of information that you all have to agree people have to have in order to contribute in a meaningful way. Otherwise, it's just chatter, right? So are there key questions, or are there options, or are there choices, or are there things to prioritize, or are there a bunch of totally open-ended questions, so you're just generating ideas and then looking for themes and emerging something? I don't know. But those are the questions that we ask as we frame up this engagement design. This doesn't take months and months and months, but it takes a lot of hard thinking. But once you start it, it actually, I don't know, it tends to come together pretty fast.
Can you describe a situation where you designed a community engagement plan then? I guess that would be your design and implementation plan. Who was involved in that planning process, and how were the individuals chosen to participate?
Well, about 75 in recent memory. This is what I do. This is all I do for a living. I teach it, I train, teach at the university, I teach it to clients, and I also consult. So, you know, I do things like, I'm doing a statewide consultation on early childhood education right now. I did a big project out in Chaska for a 20-year from now bridge redesign that involved 13 different agencies and thousands of stakeholders, and was complicated as all get out. I did a big consultation for the Minneapolis Park Board around Lake Harriet, which gets 1 million visitors a year, figuring out how to do a major facility improvement to meet a whole variety of very, very divergent needs. How are people chosen? It's actually relatively easy because the people who are chosen are sort of everybody, right? This isn't about saying, we're gonna pick 15 people and they're going to decide. If we use a steering committee or an advisory group or whatever, which is quite common in the work that I do, they are process stewards. They are not content leaders. It wouldn't be fair, right? Then why bother to engage your stakeholders if they don't have any, influence? That's about the promise. What's the promise you're making? So if your promise is, we'll keep you, under consult, we'll keep you informed, listen to and acknowledge concerns and aspirations, and provide feedback on how your input influence a decision, which is the minimum, right? It's like, we're gonna give you a few choices, you tell us what you think, and then thank you very much, and we'll decide, which is perfectly fine. For example, I was working on a trail system, and it was 5 years down the road, and there were enormously complex land acquisition issues. And so there was like a route, and that was just like what it was. So I'm not asking people where it should go, because we don't have a choice. It's gonna go here, and the district owned the land, so they had the right to do it there. But there were a lot of questions about screening, because every property owner could choose their own kind of screening within a set of choices. So we were over at Consult, because that was correct. It accurately represented where we were. A lot of projects I do that are a ton of fun are over in Collaborate, where it's truly a partnership. It's like, there's a need, but there are lots of ways to get there. Let's all figure this out together. Those are complex and messy and a ton of fun.
Does
Just
it
a
necessarily involve more time as you get on the spectrum of level
Not
of public
necessarily.
impact?
Not necessarily, it's just how you use the time. In the work that I do, I'm doing the City of Rochester's, I'm doing the in stakeholder engagement for their comprehensive planning process, which is a big, messy process, and really exciting. And because you're looking at 100,000 people, and you're looking at a 20-year plan, which is just conceptually, people are going, what? People just don't get that kind of stuff like y'all do all the time. Long-range planning, I always encourage a highly distributed partnership-based model. The information that has to be shared, the decisions that have to be made, the processes and the contributions you want from stakeholders, that is about making the information understandable by normal human beings, because they are the decision makers ultimately in this, and therefore it has to be able to be communicated in a way that people will understand. Once you've created the information that's to be shared and a set of questions that need to be asked and the input or feedback that you're getting, I like using the distributed model where we find a bunch of community partners, people and entities with high stakes, and you let them run their own sessions. You support and facilitate. You don't usually even have to train it, but you do if you need to. They run their own sessions. You can have hundreds of them going, and you can have them go concurrently. If you do y'all come to one of 3 big X's, well, it often doesn't work. But you have to time those, and it doesn't make the process shorter. It actually makes it harder because it's much harder to reach consensus.
So this highly distributed participation model, is that another word of saying cross-section stakeholders?
It's both. You end up with a cross-section, but the distributed model is a capacity building based model. And it's saying, you all can do this. You're certainly capable. You're grown-ups or you're young adults. And we want you to own this. We want you to own this. So we're going to help create the capacity, community-wide to own this decision. So I'm never very fond of people who just kind of stand outside and throw rocks, right? And so that often happens when people feel that they've been disenfranchised. So I like creating processes that not only enfranchise people, but empower them to be a meaningful, a substantive part of this decision by making this a very, and I use the word collaborative, not suggesting that's where we are on the spectrum, but this kind of collaborative approach can be anywhere on the spectrum. It doesn't make any difference. It's just a way that I like to make processes much more inclusive, much more welcoming, much broader, more broadly distributed, and also much more feasible. If you see yourselves as having to run all these sessions on top of all the other million things you have to do to keep a school district running well on behalf of our students every day, it's just too much. You're not going to get to all your underrepresented stakeholders. You're not going to hear the breadth of voices who need to be involved in a community-wide decision like this. I use it a lot. You can use it on any topic in any community.
How have you supported a community engagement plan where transparency in the process was critical?
I've never done one when it wasn't, because all my work is in the public sector. So it's the center of everything.
How is that transparency supported then?
It's supported in a bunch of ways. I mean, one of the easiest ways is the fact that you're a public entity, and so you know how to do this in a transparent way. And because that's part of your core values that you've agreed, you've said, it includes a promise that the public's contribution will influence the decision, which never means everybody gets their way. Right? We're clear on that. But it means you're honest. You are clear on your engagement objectives. You're clear where you are on the spectrum. You adopt these core values. You put them out there. You tell people what the process is. You welcome everybody and anybody's participation in this. You frame it so it's responsible, so it's ethical, so it's meaningful. But it doesn't mean that all those meetings that your neighbor runs with her neighborhood association are we don't put them all on cable TV and make them all be subject to that, right? That's not about transparency. That's about being in Mason, right? But the results come out absolutely, and they're part of the public record. Of course they are. The participants are part of the public record. You don't violate privacy laws, but everybody gets to be a part of this. And it's exciting, and it's fun, and it demonstrates that you recognize, value, and appreciate the community's contribution to this community decision. So you just show it in everything you do.
What does it mean to influence the decision in the second value?
That means if you're going to engage the community, you're going to do something with what they have to say. That's what it means. So again, it's not that if your response to the question is, do you want A or B, and you pick A, and you pick B, that you both get your way.
Right.
But it means we heard, we listened, we looked at the totality of the responses. And it also doesn't mean you kind of save everything up. Yeah, I think it's very unwise strategically in almost any decision to have a whole long process with one narrow thing at the end and a ta-da. I just think that's unwise. First of all, the world doesn't generally work that way. There are all kinds of intermediate decisions, so I like design a process, and again, it depends on the key issues, it depends on where you are, so I don't want to use too specific examples, but there are going to be interim decisions along the way. The questions and engagement we have early on are going to be around something that happens here. And then we're gonna ask other stuff about something else. And we're gonna be really clear on how these go in its phases, its stages, because that's how decisions work. Complex decisions always have multiple parts. So you show, and what I like to see is particularly to have board members and superintendents and other people who have, you know, a voice at the public table, to talk specifically. These were our objectives. This is where we were on the spectrum. These were our core values. Here are the types of engagement techniques and tools we used. Here are the themes that emerged, and here's how those themes have influenced the decision. To name that, to use those words. I also like telling stories, so when I'm standing, you know, I'm sitting on the dais, and we've done a big engagement, talked to thousands of people, and blah, 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 about school start times was our latest drama. We say, here's what we heard. I said, here's what I wanted. Here's what the science says. And here was the process, and here was the recommendation. And I'm actually unhappy. I'm unhappy with this outcome. But I trust the process, and I trust what the stakeholders told us, and that this actually isn't resolved yet. And we don't get to make the change I wanted to make. So I say that on the dais, on TV, so that people can hear about the process and how it influenced the decision, even if I was unhappy.
Mhm.
It's good to do that.
All right, this might be as good a time as any, because the committee and the board as a whole is entertaining the notion of using as one of those tools of community engagement, a survey. You know, and maybe having some public participation and talk through of the various options and developing information that might support or
Just developing information about
right,
options.
right. And so do you see that as a tool that could work and without putting a set time parameter on it, but something that could be part of that process where then you come back after the survey and still engage people even after that?
So.
Or have you seen a
I'm gonna
situation where
pull
that's
out-
used?
I'm gonna pull out another graphic, right?
Okay.
And I'll just walk you through it. So this says, let's do public participation. And then people say, well, let's use a survey. Let's do focus groups. Let's do, you know, this kind of other kind of online engagement. Let's do World Conveys, right? And I say, awesome ideas, write them down, put them on Post-it notes and set them aside. Let's figure out what our objectives are. What's our promise? What are we trying to accomplish? Let's figure out our stakeholders. Let's design the process, and then let's pick the tools. So I'm going to say, sure, I use surveys all the time, right?
Okay.
I don't know, and it depends on your purpose, right? So if you're trying to do an opinion poll, which is not a public engagement tool, an opinion poll is an opinion poll, and you pay for it, and it's a stratified random sample, and if that's what you decide you want to do to supplement an engagement process prior to some formal action, you are welcome to do that. I think they can be very effective. I believe, I don't want to say I think because I don't know what I think, but I believe that if you do a very robust, transparent, and inclusive process, you'll know. You'll know.
The
It
survey
may
may
be.
not be necessary.
An opinion poll may not be necessary.
Okay.
You may
just-
still choose to do it, just because it just may be a wise use of funds, but I just have no opinion.
In the interest of time and being fair between
Forgive me.
the various candidates here, just wondering, some of these may have already been answered. We had some preset questions, but do you describe a situation where you involved a large cross-section of stakeholders, and with a plan, how did you ensure that the public's role was meaningful, that the participation was encouraged, and that you were able to gain input from potentially affected stakeholders who were more challenging to engage?
The barriers, right? So if you go back to the first stages, right, and we identify all stakeholders, and we look at those who are easy to engage and those who are hard to engage. It's the hard to engage ones where we focus our energy, and that's where this partnership model works so well. I am not gonna do well myself going out with a bunch of Spanish-speaking community members and conducting an input session. This will not work for multiple reasons, right? I think they're all fairly obvious. But if I partner with, I mean, y'all know people, right? You just do. You're a school district. You know lots and lots of people. You've got all kinds of families. You've got all kinds of connections, right? You know people who can run that session. And you know people who can run it with young families with little kids who don't have a minute of extra time to mess around with going to some community meeting. But they will be at school conferences. They will be at, sign-ups for various, recreation programs. They will be at childcare programs. They will be at, right? You know how to reach them. You know how to reach tons of people by going through those other networks and not saying, the only way you can participate is if you come here at, 6 o'clock on, the third Tuesday of February. That, you're toast. But a distributed process that's fair and equitable, right? That doesn't say, well, those high school kids, God, they can't deal with this kind of stuff. They darn well better be able to deal with this kind of stuff. They're high school kids about to graduate into the real world. Of course they can deal with this. I've done all kinds of community visioning stuff with second graders who are awesome.
Okay.
So you create an infrastructure, an information and an engagement infrastructure that lets all your stakeholders participate, and it builds in a support structure so they can do so successfully.
What would you see as the roles and responsibilities that you would expect from the board and/or district staff, administration?
Well, first of all, is to help shape the process in collaboration with the community, and then to honor and work the process, to trust it. If you're worried about it, let's talk about it. If something's missing, let's fix it. But if we collectively own the process, we own it. We all stand up for it. And if somebody says, well, I didn't get a chance to participate, let me tell you how. There's still room. There's still time, because until it's over, there's time, right? And so you make a lot of space by using a distributed approach so that you don't ever have a fundamental problem with exclusion. You just make it so welcoming and so sincere. And it's not complicated, so own the process.
It's very much
participate, work
upfront
it
loaded,
out.
front end loaded.
Sure it is, but it's not so much work. I don't mean to scare you. It's intense for a few hours here and there, and then you work it. In a distributed approach, it just starts to roll.
How can you determine whether the level of community engagement's adequate or that represents the concerns of those impacted by the decision?
A critical question, right? And that's one of the values, I think, of having a process advisory committee or a steering committee, whatever you call it. And again, that's not content people, that's process people. And as a consultant, I always rely on that group to tell me, what are you hearing? So these are people who have their ear to the ground. It may or may not be anybody in this room. I would expect it would be, but I wouldn't expect it to be everybody in this room, because we need to have some other people too. But people who are out there, who are listening, who aren't about a particular answer, but who just are connected. What are you hearing? Are people participating? Are they feeling engaged? Are there sectors that we're missing? Are there groups? We look at our stakeholder list. We just check them off. Are we doing this? Does it feel like enough? Remember, public engagement is not a stratified random sample in disguise. It is not. But it is about equity. It is about equity. It is about justice. It's not about only the loudest voices in the room. They get heard also, of course, but they're not the only ones who get heard. So you need to hear from your whole community, even if they're not yet voting age, right? Because this is about kids, right? And 98% of them don't yet vote.
So take it in that, because this is all that you do, you've had situations where the public was divided in response to solving a community issue.
The public is always divided. Right. I mean, that's the nature of the beast. You don't do a big engagement process if everybody already agrees. Because an engagement process has happened already in a de facto way, and the community has reached consensus, and it's a ta-da. You only do this if there's a lot of difference of opinion, or when there's just a lot of stuff. Sometimes it isn't just a big difference of opinion. You created a bit of a divergence of opinion, but that was around that. This is now something different. I don't know what this is, but it's not that. I mean, that's already been decided, so now you're into something new, whatever it is. And so, I don't know what community feeling is about the, whatever it is, this new thing that has yet to be created. We'll find out. But when you just begin anything, there's the full spectrum of positions. And so you assume divergence when you walk in with a whole new thing, right?
All right, well, I think that you have addressed pretty much all the questions that we had, just except, how are your fees determined, and, you know, how much time would you anticipate this work would take?
On a project like this, I would do it hourly. You control it, you know, I really think that from what I understood in some earlier brief conversations and just knowing a little bit about some of the training that some of your staff has had and just the overall capacity of the community, I don't think you need a lot of my help for implementation. I would really prefer to work with you hard on some intense design and then be available for guidance. You know, if you want me to help you shape, for example, one of the things we're doing in Rochester is we create a toolkit. It's a physical box that has a bunch of stuff in it. It has how to use this toolkit, and we ask people to host sessions. So, you know, so you're part of a church group. Can you get together some of your friends and neighbors from your church group, and can you bring them together to talk about the comprehensive plan? And you say, sure. So you check out a toolkit from the library, and you just run a session, you write down, everybody writes down their answers, and you drop it back. Right, so it's very much community-based. So once you get that set, and you get, you know, a bunch of community contacts, groups and organizations that people just divvy up and start calling through, it doesn't all have to be staff doing that either, let's be clear. You get all kinds of community volunteers, so they'll call a bunch of other people to volunteer. I mean, this is the upper Midwest, we volunteer. I mean, that's just how these states work, so we get that, and that's an awesome thing. So, I don't think you're gonna need a lot of help. I can help you think about like when to start, when you've got enough. You know, so I can meet with the, whatever we call it, steering committee or process advisory group, and get a sense of how to pull it together. And then how does that fit into the next phase? How does that inform it? How do we need to change this? Because you always change. This is your design and implementation is a living, breathing document. It doesn't just like get done and just work. It never works that way, right? So I can help adjust it along the way. But you're going to build capacity in this very, very fast. So use my time wisely.
Okay.
What is the hourly fee?
1.25 for school districts.
Do you have any estimate of how many hours? You probably don't have, do you? Okay.
It's up to you.
No, that's okay. And when you say we don't need a lot of help, we don't need a lot of help, why are we talking to you then?
I don't think you need a lot of help with the implementation. I mean, design is hard.
So we need help with design, but not
I
implementation.
think you can do most of the implementation yourself.
So who do you see then doing the implementation? The board members or the administration or who? The
And-
public?
And everybody. Because it's a community thing, right? So if you use a distributed process, you'll have some things that you'll do yourselves, right? But you use a distributed process, once you start getting some content out there, content meaning, you know, information, the key questions, you see it as part of phases, you've got networks in this community that exist. Tap them. Just tap the existing networks. Work through the systems, work through the groups, the organizations. That doesn't matter, it doesn't have anything to do with schools. I mean, it doesn't have to have, it can be the Sierra Club, it can be the Chamber, it can be the Rotary, it can be faith communities, it can be affinity groups. Don't make a
But
difference.
what I hear you telling me is that we are not gonna need a lot of help with implementation. But the problem with implementation is the public. The public's not gonna want the school board members implementing this, because that's part of their issue. They feel that there's agendas and that we're biased and, you know, either pro or con, whichever way we're biased. They're not gonna want our involvement in the implementation. And I would hate to throw this on all the administrators to implement something like this. So I get real concerned when you say, we don't need a lot of your help with implementation, but we will with design. Because honestly, we need to hire you for implementation, not just the design. Would you agree with me?
Well,
Well, it depends what
I'm
kind of.
happy to help, so I'm not refusing. I'm just saying that if you make it about one person, board members, administration, or consultant, it's, we're not going to get the penetration you need for these big community issues. So I will help you think about it, but I can't run a small session with a community organization any better than anybody else. And I surely can't run it as well as they can run it themselves. And that's what I'm getting at. So it's not about, it's about managing a robust, transparent, inclusive, and well-designed process such that lots and lots of people can implement it with integrity and with transparency. Because you are, and I use control with quotes because I want to be careful that word's not misunderstood, but you control the framework of it, right? Because this is the board's effort. I mean, right, it's nobody else's, right? It belongs to the board. But you are collaboratively creating that framework of what are the engagement objectives, what are the key issues, what are the questions or the feedback or the option or whatever that whole thing is, right? But then running it belongs to the community. You create that capacity by giving them what they need to do that successfully themselves.
Part of designing it,
We demystify it.
part of designing it is empowering also the process steering committee, and they can monitor
They
how
can
it's
help.
getting
They can be
implemented.
ambassadors.
Yeah.
They can, we're doing something in 2 weeks in Rochester because staff feels, well, we have to have something that looks like we're doing something. You know, we've got 10 toolkits. They're out all over the city all the time, but because they're not in one place where people can take pictures and put it in the newspaper, it doesn't feel to staff like anything's happening, even though there are hundreds of people talking. Okay, cool. So we're asking a bunch of people who would normally be hosting these toolkit sessions out in their own neighborhoods to all come to one place and do it together. So it's exactly the same thing, but it creates this sense of a critical mass. And we also said, you know, it might be useful for people who just feel a little shy about this. They feel uncomfortable. I'm not sure I know how to do this. Fine, come and do it as part of a group. We'll help you. And of course, they don't need any help, but it'll make them feel better, and that's awesome, because that's about that capacity building. And then we ask them, if you're gonna do it in this group setting, then will you go back and do another one with different people in your neighborhood? And they're saying, yes, I can do that. Just do it with me once together. Cool, we can do that.
Okay.
So again, we make it easy for people to thoughtfully participate, and it's also not once. Again, I really wanna stress, this isn't like, room, ta-da. This is going to be a multi-phased process. And again, I don't know what the phases are, and I don't know what the questions are, but I know there's gonna be some stuff, and then this, and then some stuff, and then this. And that's your reporting out, that's your cross-checking. Are we kinda all moving forward? Uh-huh, okay. If not, there is no going forward. Then we back up a little bit, and we fix that, and then we go forward. So it lets you do that adjustment, and that's what I can be most helpful with. And I'll help in other ways too, but I really want to build local capacity.
Okay. Only one other question for me. You're involved in something in Rochester and obviously other projects. Are you too busy? You got too much on your plate to
Well, I
handle
thought
this
about
for
this
us?
when I got the call. I am totally too busy if you wanted me to run the whole implementation. But I almost never do that anymore. I just don't, because I really believe that y'all have to own this work. And so I'm doing a lot less on the ground implementation and much more of this capacity building, and it's working really well.
But part
So
of
I'm
it,
okay in 2015.
but part of that process could be determining who might be in charge of the implementation, correct?
The many peoples who are in charge, absolutely.
So, all right, is there any other questions?
At the end of this whole process, what happens in terms of, what's the outcome? I mean, is there a report? Does it identify themes? Does it
At
give you
each of
direction?
those, at each of those pause points in the process, generally with this process advisory committee, again, we're making up names, and with, the key leaders who are involved in this, there is something that is written up.
Okay.
So, and what I like to do is I like to write up the process along the way because it's a lot easier than wait till the end. So, and I like this coming out in public spaces and press releases, and it comes up at board meetings, is we've finished this phase, and this was where, remember, we were asking about this, and these were the questions, and here were the themes that emerged, and here were the priorities, and we're using that to shape this. So how does the public's contributions affect the decision? Right there, they just see it right there. Okay, so because of that, we're doing this here, and these are the new set of questions and issues, and now we've whatever it is, we've narrowed it, we've enlarged it, we've changed it, I don't know, depends what the questions are, right? So we're here, and so you see it along the way. So in the end, it's a compilation of all this. Because otherwise it's madness, right? And people have completely forgotten what we were doing here by the time we got here. So we bring each of these to closure in a formal, fairly big way. Everybody listening, everybody paying attention, right? And then we also include that in the next set of materials. So this is what happened because, we always have people who say, I didn't know anything about this at the 11th hour, right? Which is fine. I respect that. That's their truth. So I make sure when they show up at the 11th hour, they see all this stuff. So it's not like, oh, sorry, you missed it. No, everybody's welcome whenever they arrive, and we just make sure that they have all that.
Okay.
So they can't say it wasn't there. All they can say is, I wasn't there. That's all right.
Do you have any estimate of how much time this type of thing can take for the problem that we have?
Well,
I mean, you've worked these kinds of difficult problems out with other groups, I'm sure.
it's a bunch of months,
Well, what's a bunch of months?
because we haven't, I
6
don't know what
months?
the engagement objectives are. That's probably, it's like 3 to 9.
Okay, all right.
It just takes a
That's
little
close.
while
That's
because you're
close enough.
talking about a whole community, thinking about some really complex, big
And then the
picture,
holidays are here
long-term
too,
things.
so that could push it out and,
Nothing's happening for a month.
right.
That's just, we just know that. That's just how it is. I can't change that, so.
So part of that, I guess, you would have a better idea of that time frame once we got into giving you the background of what's been done already, what the objectives will be, and then getting that.
Then we will collectively decide how long we think this is gonna take, because it's that phasing. And I honestly don't know, because I don't know anything, right, about the details, because they haven't been decided yet. It's not like you're keeping them from me, they have to be collectively decided. I don't know how clearly we're gonna be able to see the phases.
Well,
We're gonna be able
of
to
your
see some of
generic
them.
5-step process, though.
That all,
actu-
a lot of that happens right up front.
Right, that's what I mean. It's the 4th step is the
Yeah.
actual design and implementation plan.
Yeah.
And that could be, 30 to 45 days, something like
No,
that?
no more than that. No
Okay.
more than that. Sorry, you mean to get to the plan?
Right.
Yes, 45 days
All right.
is probably close, just because of where we are in the calendar.
But there's the 3 steps before that,
Yeah.
that's included in there.
Exactly, and so we'll have a much clearer sense when we're there, but again, what I'm not sure, because this is messy. Everything's messy, right? But we're gonna be able to see the first phase, and we're gonna be able to see the last phase, but I'm not sure how much detail we're gonna be able to see about the middle phases, because I think they're gonna be really dramatically shaped by the first phase. And of course, again, I'm just talking very high level concept, because I honestly have no idea what the questions are. But this just impresses me as the kind of thing that first phase is going to be really deeply informative.
Well, thank you. I think that was an important part to get across, is that unlike a superintendent search where you have an end date of when you want to appoint your new superintendent.
And you know what the outcome is.
Right. And then you can have deadlines along the way. This is a much different process than
It's
that.
very fluid, and that's part of that transparency with your community. Don't make promises you can't keep. Right, so if you say, you know, it depends on what the community's perspective is. It may take, you may have so much kind of unthinking to do, because if wherever it is you're going, if it's really different from where you've been, you got thousands of people who are in a completely different space. And so it's like you're underwater. So you gotta get yourself up to zero, into kind of neutral space where people are even listening that this is something different. And then you gotta build awareness and consensus around a different way of talking about the topics. And, because there are multiple topics, not one topic, there's a lot of topics.
Excellent.
So it
Well,
just takes-
any other questions of any other board?
No, thank you.
Committee members?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your
It's my
time.
pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for being here at such a late hour and having a full day in front of that.
Aren't we all used to this?
Yeah, yes.
A little too used to it?
Well, if we aren't yet, we will be by the time this process is done, so,
But
you.
if we work together, I guarantee you'll have a good time.
all right,
'Cause
good.
this is fun.
Is it the St. Paul board who's involved in the, is it the late start? I'm sorry. I wasn't supposed to ask, was I?
No, I mean, that was what I was really unhappy about.
I know, I read all about it in the
Yeah,
paper, I was
science
following it
says-
in the paper.
The science says we need to start later, and the problem is, I just can't make it all work yet, but I will. We'll get there. But there are, I move 38,000 kids every day. It's a lot of kids. And I can't just pop them on Metro Transit, even if I do, I still gotta pay for it, so it doesn't
Right.
save me any money. I still have to run 3 tiers of buses, so if I get high school kids later, then I gotta put little kids on the sidewalk at 7 o'clock.
So every problem has its parameters and
It
different,
does,
yes.
and it's just, it's really easy if you don't have to actually make the decision. So, yeah, but it's fascinating. So there you go.
Again,
We don't have easy challenges. I just call us one fun.
yeah. Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Take care. Goodbye.
All right, she's seeing out, and as far as your comments, input, what you thought about these interviews?
I am concerned about the implementation of this. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong, maybe I've got the wrong perspective on it, but I know that as board members, we don't have time to be at the things she was talking about. It sounds like it's gonna be extensive, and it would have to be in order to get community engagement, I get that. But we don't have time to do that, and I think the administrators don't have time to do that. Unless you, I'm looking at it wrong, maybe you're envisioning more of the community takes ownership of this and they do it, and we don't. And I think it's bad for the board members to be heavily involved in these, any kind of community input sessions, because they're gonna see that as being,
I didn't hear her say that us board members are responsible for the implementation. She was saying we, or you all, meaning all community members. And the implementation part, what I'm hearing from her is if you got the process set up correctly, the implementation is actually pretty easy. The key is getting the process set up, having the right people steering that process, And,
Now, how do you get the right people steering it? Is
well,
that
that's
part
part
of
of,
what she does too?
that's part of what she helps design, is
Okay.
getting the people on board and getting that established, and then developing the tools, but you don't pick your tools until you know what your objective is. It's, you know, kind of like gardening. If you know, you gotta decide what you're there to do that day. You don't pick a hoe to necessarily, you know,
Right.
dig. And so that's where she would help develop those tools. And that's what I'm hearing, is the very front end loaded, can be intensive. The intensive part is engaging us and then maybe some key stakeholders from the community to help develop this plan. That's what I'm hearing. I don't know if anybody.
Yeah, I was having the same concerns as Sandy was, until I heard the explanation, and where I was getting caught up was, that it seemed like if she's a facilitator, and what my awareness is of facilitators, is that there's a certain skill level that they have to get things out of people, and I'm thinking, how do you train, you know, how do you create capacity and train people to do that skill? But the more she discussed it, I think the more comfortable I became in terms of, she helps with these questions and identifying the engagement objectives and the questions that come out of that and that have to be asked to the community. I think those are going to be very important and have to be implemented in a manner in which it's not going to be difficult. It's just, here are the questions, what are your answers? Those are recorded and turned in, and then the analysis happens. So, in another level, or you know, another place. So, I actually think that there's an advantage to the method that she's describing, by getting the community involvement creates community ownership, and but it has to be, you know, that front end has to be done very, very well, I think, in order for that to be successful, for us to get the answers that give us the direction and the themes and so.
Right. What I'm totally buy into this IAP 2's public participation spectrum and the core values. And I can see where you have to buy into those for the process to work. I have a little hard time not having defined deadlines and so forth, and that's what is kind of scary. But I think also the idea of the trust and the collaboration, if that's going to be the level of the spectrum where we're going to go. I personally, that's where I would like to see this. I think that maybe what we've done in the past is somewhere between inform and involve. And it takes, you know, you have to trust the community to do that. And but I think it can get done. And I really think we're going to have a better outcome if we get that kind of reciprocated trust with the community.
I hear what you're saying about not having kind of a set schedule, things like that. This is going to get done by this date, this is going to get done by that date. But what we do have is a roadmap that identifies the steps. And so I think we can monitor somewhat the progress to those steps, the progress of those steps. So we'd have some measurement of progress.
I like the idea of checking in, and you know, this is empowering other groups too. You know, there could be working groups that are spawned from this that then work simultaneous. That's the other thing that I liked, is it's not all being done by the board.
No.
If public is doing this, and you can have different tasks or different options, if you will, or information being viewed by different groups, but having that one steering group that then brings it all back and continuing to communicate.
So you envision one larger steering group, like this group that's already apparently been meeting, there's 20 people or something like that. And then smaller auxiliary groups doing various things, gathering.
It could be, I don't know, I guess we have to get in more detail with her, but she gave that as, you know, as one of the examples of, you know, what they've done. Getting public participation comes in many groups. It's not just meeting from 6 to 9 on a particular night and anyone who wants to come and then just leaving it at that. I think I'm getting from her as a multifaceted. The idea that it's hourly, I kind of like too, because we get into this and maybe we decide if this is not going to work out, we just end it and we go in another
Is there any
direction.
problem with an open-ended hourly thing from a budget standpoint or from a public standpoint, that we're saying we're gonna hire her for $125 an hour, but we don't know how many hours?
No, I mean, it's just what Jamie talked about. At any point, the board can discontinue her
Okay.
services.
The fact that she thinks she could get to that point, get a process developed in about 45 days, that to me kind of signals that while it's going to be intensive, it's not going to be kind of never ending and just go on and on and.
Okay.
But
And we do have a budget for
I was gonna
consultant
say, there must
services.
be a budget.
As well. And so then if we were exceeding that budget, then it would be something that the board would need to consider.
You can put a not to exceed amount in there as well if you wanted to.
Mhm.
So I missed the beginning, so I'm not sure if you talked about checking references. Is there anything specifically that you'd like to know from those references so that we could talk to some individuals that she's worked with, or?
I would like to do that.
Mhm.
I think-
Certainly, yeah.
I didn't see it specifically listed on there, but if we could ask her for some references of, and understanding that she's had a pretty broad spectrum of different types of projects, but something that would be similar to ours, I think would be helpful.
And so what topics specifically would you want us to explore? Certainly we'll ask for their general feedback and, challenges and so forth. But I guess there may be some things that were brought up that you'd like us to find out more about.
Would like to find out more, maybe similar issues. I mean, if we could find references that have a similar issue that we've got,
Well, I'd like to know,
How
did.
effective was her work?
Right, how effective?
right.
Did she come in within the expectation of what the project might have cost? And did the process that she helped design, did that end up getting ultimately successful as far as the public participation part of it?
Yeah, those are
What was
key.
I think that is,
Yeah, did they get a good result out of the process she designed?
in a timely manner too, I think also a time frame.
Kind of a catch-all question is asking if they have any concerns, anything that
Mhm.
they had concerns about, or as a result of their working with. Seems like a foregone conclusion, we're not even talking about the first candidate.
I think the first gentleman, honestly, the fact that he has kids in this
That
district
was my
scares me.
concern, yeah. Oh,
And I think he sounds like he'd be very unbiased, like he'd be right down the
I'm
middle of
sure
the
he
road,
would
and
be.
I'm sure he would, he's a professional. But I'm telling you, the public is gonna hear that he's got kids in this district, first thing they're gonna say is, well, did he vote yes or no? And they're gonna assume he's got an agenda, and I don't wanna put him in that position.
Yeah, that's a tough one, I think, for me too. I think there's a just potential perception issue.
Yeah, there
And-
is.
And we have that kind of history, so.
And it's putting him in a bad position.
Yeah.
Because he lives in the community, he's got kids here, that puts him in a bad position
Right.
too.
The fact that
Just my
he's
thoughts.
facilitated other issues, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing that he doesn't have specific, school, issue background. But perhaps he could be used as a facilitator in some capacity in whatever process is designed.
Well, yeah,
Mhm.
maybe,
Yes.
maybe she can lay out this process, she can come up with the design, and when she needs to, or wants to step back, and if we need any help with implementing her design,
Yeah, because he
Might work
seems
for
to have been
that.
very involved in the implementation. I was very impressed with the
Mhm.
complexity of the projects that he's worked
Right.
on and the size and scope. Seems like it was be very hard to implement with governmental units and non-governmental
Mhm.
units and people who are hard to bring to the table and so forth, but that's kind of the way I saw it.
Mhm.
he might be able to be used as the implementer when she gets the design done. It's a
Right.
thought.
Yes.
I think we gotta
Be
try
an
to explore,
unbiased person,
There might be ways to include him, yeah.
All right.
So are you ready to, by consensus, move her forward to the board if the references check out.
Yeah, pending the reference checks, do we want to put any recommendation, a dollar value on the recommendation?
I don't know.
I think that we might want to wait on that and see what the, well,
Well,
No.
if Tim could report what our budget is for
Yeah.
something like this, and what other types of consultants we may need to hire in this budget period?
Well,
We can look at it. We can look at it and kind of, I don't know that I'd be able to say, you've got X amount of dollars
Right.
available for this, but, and
Mhm.
she actually is going to need, I think, what I heard, more feedback before she can say, here's how many hours I think I
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
I need
That's-
to put
Right.
into this. So I think that's kind of a
so it's
challenge.
kind of
I
premature.
think for right now, we probably need to leave that open, till, at least until we get to the design phase, where she can then probably give us more of an idea of how much time she thinks it might take.
and again, you're in charge at any
Right,
time.
we can pull
Right.
the
You
plug.
could, right.
I guess what we would do is there consensus then for the board to approve us moving the process forward with her? And then,
I'll go along with that. I don't know, I've got a few concerns about her, but I think she's better, she got a better design plan than the other. I mean, I think she probably can do
Right.
the design. I go along with moving her forward. There's no other option, is there? I mean, are there other companies that do this kind of thing?
Well, certainly there are other companies that do engagement process. One of the things that we had heard from community members was this IAP2 and interest in this kind of process. So that was one of the areas we asked, who are trainers, who are involved in this? There are just not many in each state. So we looked in Wisconsin and looked in Minnesota as well.
and that's what this international group does, it just focuses on public participation
Correct.
and I think it's a good starting spot. I'm inclined to at least explore it further. I have the hesitancy about, it's not as definitive, with descriptions of what's being done. But on the other hand, there's an advantage to that, because I don't want somebody coming in here with this cookie cutter approach, saying, this is what you need to do, and I haven't even heard a thing about your district, but yet I already know you need to set up these steering groups and this, feedback committee and so forth, and have that all planned out ahead. I think the idea that she's approaches it, she's got lots of experience, obviously, doing this, and she approaches each one as kind of unique and gets information before she starts directing where things go, and she's not going to be seen at all as being biased as
No.
far as what an outcome is.
She won't.
So,
I got a sense that there's a high level of expertise here in this area, and the process that's been laid out, the methodology seems to fit, I think, pretty well with where we are in this community. Large community engagement, that's very much her MO, and I think that's where we are, so.
well, and then the thing that we would recommend to the board, as far as who would meet with her to get this process started, and I'm assuming that she could meet with us as the F&G group, and then, or do we develop another ad hoc committee about this process, which,
Well, I think it might be good to ask her, pending the board's approval,
all right,
what her experience has been, and then bring that back to you and say, how would you like to proceed?
I think it's gonna be important for her to know, and for us to understand, that there is a community group that's active now, and how do they become involved in this, and how do they
right,
become
absolutely.
interrelated to this?
So, is there only one community group? Because
I've only
I'm
heard
hearing
one.
that there
I've heard of two.
a couple,
Yeah,
so I didn't know.
Okay, I'm not aware.
but anyway, I think that yes, the short answer to that is yes, it would be to let her know that that process is in place, and, or that group is in place, groups.
I've got some reservations about her, about everything I heard here, but as you pointed out, at $125 an hour, we're in control. So if we get into this with her trying to design this process, and this committee feels like it's not going where we want it to go, or it's not going fast enough, or things aren't coming together, we can always put an end to it. There's no contract that we have to sign with her for a certain number of hours or anything, so I think I'm fine, as
Okay.
consensus to go along with getting it started, knowing that we can always stop it if we feel like we're not getting anywhere.
All right.
Because you're just recommending that we use her services
Right.
to the board.
Okay,
All right.
very good. And we have that. Thank you, everyone, for your work and the late hour.
All right. Been a long day, huh?